can we do with our children when they're at school?
Well, for those in California, and I don't know about all the other state laws, but I think this is in some of the other states, a child who's 12 and up can access any therapy without any kind of consent from parents. And that's been in place since 2011, I believe, 2010 or 2011, when Schwarzenegger was in charge. I think it was close to the end of his term. And that's what AB 665 was, to sort of extend that so that now they could go so that was for outpatient, meaning, not residential. So the AB 665 just went into place in October, that now they're allowed at age 12 to consent to their own residential program, their own residential treatment. So that's how the schools can do counseling legally without any parent involvement. And it's a lot easier because they have a captured audience right there, and they can pull the kids out of class. I mean, I'll even talk about stuff I did that I'm ashamed of in Palo Alto. So I don't know if you know this about me. I worked at Gun High School. Are you familiar with the history of Palo Alto? There was a suicide cluster there, meaning there were 6 kids in the same year that actually died by suicide. And when and in the beginning of the school year, there was a lot of anxiety. This is actually it's in the history of the town, because there was a cluster in 2009, and I was there in the 2015 one. So there was already a lot of wounds from the community. So they were trying to get ahead of it. And I was the head of the counseling. I was supervising the intern therapist there. And we were instructed by the administration to pull out hundreds of kids from their class without their parents' consent, to check in with them, to see if they're okay because of a student that, the death of the student. And many of them didn't even know the student. They would go through the schedules of the classes that the kids had with each other, and we were forced to meet with every kid that had a class with the one that died. And it was really sad, actually, because a lot of them were like, I'm sorry, I just don't remember that person, because one of them it happened over the summer, so it was early in the school year, and they were like, I don't really know them, or I didn't really have much of a connection with them. Can I go back to class now? But here we are, basically telling them, like, are you okay? And like telling them that they need to have this emotional reaction that they didn't even have. So all these adults around them, I think, were making the kids crazier, because the adults had their reaction and they projected that onto the kids. And they forced me to do this, to pull these kids. I was against doing it, but I did it. If this were today, I'm older and wiser, I would say, no way, I'm not doing that. And this is why. I didn't have an argument for it. I just didn't like it, and I felt like it was disruption. But now I have a stronger feelings towards it. And there was no parental consent. Actually, somebody, like a parent, told me about a suicide that happened at their child's school, and I said, make sure you tell the school you're not letting any counselor see your kid. And then that parent actually said, I'm keeping them home from school today for that reason, because the counselors can just do whatever they want. And this was, when I was doing this, was before the trans thing was such a big deal. We were still involving families as much as possible, but many of the parents honestly just said, here, just fix my kid. And so that was a tendency on the parents' end. So a lot of my messaging is, don't expect a therapist to ever fix your kid. They're not gonna. And that's probably going to cause more problems, because now there's a therapist that has a closer connection with your child than you do. And that might be the root of some of the issues that's going on in the first place. So yeah, so so the counselors are on campus, and they can just pull kids out of class. If they're 12 and up, they don't need any kind of written consent, and they could do whatever they want. So, I mean, parents really need to be aware of that.
I didn't know. And, my children are young. And so I was not, I'm learning the laws just from a legal perspective, and I'm obviously hearing from clients, but I've heard so many iterations of this. Typically, or at least it used to be, in the way that the law was couched, was that these 12-year-olds would go seek out mental health services. And so those are the ones that we wanted to help, because they were obviously, crying out for help. But now they've weaponized this law, Leno's law, Senator Leno and Governor Schwarzenegger, his bill that Governor Schwarzenegger signed into law, and they've weaponized that bill so that now the school counselors actually go out and they are seeking out the children, that they're profiling them and seeking them out, which is still, in my understanding, the way the law is written, that's still illegal, but there's just no oversight, because if it's with a child that's 12 and over. that
I didn't
nobody is
realize
even
that.
really checking anyways.
'Cause, yeah, they had
Wow.
even back then in 2015, they had surveys. I don't know if I guess they called it social emotional learning, and they were doing that, but it wasn't as pervasive as it is today. But I remember that they had these surveys, because especially that community, they were so worried about suicide that they thought they were being
Mhm.
preventative, but I think honestly they were making it worse, because they were constantly asking the kids how are they feeling, were they suicidal? They were training the adults and the minors, this QPR training, question I forgot what that stands for, but it's basically how to, talk to somebody who's suicidal and get them, get call 911 and ask them, teaching everybody basically it's okay to, ask someone, if they're feeling suicidal. But I believe they were making a lot of kids very codependent. So there were
Mm.
certain kids who were attention seeking that took advantage of this environment, and then there were the codependent kids that became overwhelmed, feeling like they had to take care of their peers. And it was a very unhealthy environment, very
Wow.
unhealthy. So they were imposing all of this mental health stuff because they thought they were being preventative, but in my opinion, they were making it worse. So
Well,
that's
yeah.
that's a theme. And therapists
Well,
really
and
think
you
they know
mentioned
better.
yeah. And you mentioned earlier about having them focus their attention on the issue. So you have the
Mhm.
codependent ones that you were just talking about have to help their peers, the attention seeking ones that are like, okay, I'm going to capitalize on this opportunity, get this one-on-one attention from this adult. But then you also have ones that are starting to think, is there something wrong? Is there something wrong? I'm going to think
Yeah.
about this issue, about this person that I didn't even really know or care about, honestly, if they're
And they
being truthful, the
ruminate. They
truthful,
ruminate
and
on
they
the
ruminate.
feelings. Yeah,
Wow.
and then they
Wow.
can't concentrate. I mean, they're literally just they're forced to come out of class. They're in class. This is a very academically high achieving school, and a lot of people blamed that. I don't actually think that was the problem. I think, it was more cultural issues. But,
Mhm.
a lot of kids, it was very important to them to stay in class and learn their schoolwork. Is a lot of Chinese kids, and culturally that was very important to them. And we were here saying, no, you got to talk about your feelings. Talk about your feelings. Don't, forget about your math class. And I mean, that's just not good for these kids. Yeah. And this was in 2015. There wasn't Instagram and all that wasn't as popular. No, TikTok, I don't think even existed at that point. So
Mhm.
the social media was out there, and it certainly was a problem, but not like it is today. So the mental health issues have only gotten worse since then.
No, and I still can't think, I'm sure again, like many of these bad bills that we talk about and that you testify against, that I've testified against, some of them are well-intentioned bills,
Yeah.
but they're not looking at the full picture. They look at one horrible situation, an exceptional situation, the exception to the rule, and then they create an entire law that applies uniformly across the entire state for all children, and they don't really play out, draw it out to the logical conclusion, which is what we have now, which is actually bad actors who are capitalizing on this direct access to our children and forcing them to ruminate and focus on issues that don't even exist. And then once they've planted the seed, whether it's depression or anxiety or suicidality or gender confusion, then pulling them further away from you and further and deeper into the counselor, wormhole to, to see what we've seen happen now, which is the secret clubs and the secret closets and
Mhm.
the shadow files and everything that we've been seeing.